Great works are rarely appreciated in their time. Films such as Blade Runner and The Thing were famously mocked when they first came out, but now stick out as some of the most memorable and formative films of their genres and eras. Knights of the Old Republic 2 stands among such titles in a similar way. Unappreciated and even panned in its time, constant comparisons were drawn to its predecessor, and many lamented that Knights 2 could not stand next to its older sibling. In at least some respects, the critiques of the original experience have some merit to their claim. KOTOR 2 would be the first of several games from developer Obsidian to launch in a state that would be generous to call unpolished. It was only the concerted efforts of the KOTOR community that finally made this game realize its full potential, as a critique and a guidebook for how Star Wars and video games as a whole could have and should have been, but never were. It was a game all too prescient, and as such its lessons are even more apt now than they were so long ago. So let's take a look at KOTOR 2 and what it has to say about storytelling in the Star Wars universe. Before getting into talking about KOTOR 2 too much, I feel it is a little necessary to give a brief overview of the first game for the uninitiated or just for those who haven't played it in a long time. I promise to be brief. An even longer time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, two Jedi named Revan and Malak went to the defense of the Republic during an invasion by the incredibly aggressive and well-equipped Mandalorians. No, not those Mandalorians. This was all against the command of the Jedi Order, who demanded more time to consider the Mandalorian threat. And so it was that every Force user who joined Revan was branded a traitor to the Order. After this war, they used an ancient relic to infinitely produce massive armadas that threatened to destroy the Republic. Fully becoming the new Sith Lords, Revan and Malak started what is referred to as the Jedi Civil War, leading those former Jedi who came with them to fight the Mandalorians, now to turn against the Republic, and more importantly, the Jedi. The Jedi managed to capture and brainwash Revan into working for them, who was able to defeat his old friend, destroy the Star Forge, and end the war. After that, Revan went missing as his memories of his time with Malak began to resurface, and as of KOTOR 2, no one knows where he has been since those Mandalorian wars. Join me now as we step into the boots of one of those outcast Jedi, the lone exile who did not follow Revan in his crusade against the Republic, but chose a different path. There is a particular sentiment echoed by many of the people the exile will encounter, that the Jedi and the Sith are the same.
The Jedi, the Sith, you don't get it, do you? To the galaxy, they're the same thing.
The Sith are the Jedi are the Sith. What matters is that they be preserved.
From our position, that assertion seems insane. Clearly, we know the Jedi are champions of good, and the Sith their counterpart in evil. Yet time and again in the history of Star Wars, the greatest of Sith were fallen Jedi, and every age of light only seemed to herald an age of greater darkness. It is important to remember that Knights 2 was preceded by a game that indulged in the basest and most typical tropes of the series. A Jedi going through the journey of gaining power and learning about himself with a dark revelation about his past which recontextualizes how they see themselves, all before finding someone who was close enough to be family in a massive space station over the fate of the galaxy. The outcome of that massive conflict, whether Revan followed the light or listened to the call of the dark, left the galaxy on the brink. The cost of the squabble between Jedi and Sith was paid by every living being. It is in those parallels that Kreia steps into the role of our protagonist's mentor. Both the former Sith Lord and Jedi Master, she has turned from the ways of those teachings because she has seen, and now wishes to teach the exile why both of those philosophies were wrong. It is an oft-remembered quote of Yoda that wars do not make one great, But Kreia wholeheartedly disagrees with that sentiment, and for good reason. While perhaps, even if I personally find the former sentiment to be more true, within the scope of the stories told in Star Wars, and more broadly within the narratives conforming to the hero's journey as a whole, it is always conflict that awakens and nurtures the inner powers of its protagonist. Luke begins his path when conflict finds his farm, Anakin when he is left with no choice but to pilot a starfighter, and the exile when she is found by the Sith. It was their continued conflict that gave them the power they needed to face themselves, grow their bonds with their friends, and overcome the odds. Without conflict, they would all have remained, at least as far as their stories were concerned, unremarkable. Nothing but farmers, slaves, or vagabonds. Kreia often takes actions which seem to prod the player towards the dark side, but it is entirely reasonable to think that she is merely attempting to make you re-examine if the consequences of the journeys of heroes of old might have been as beneficial as they appeared to be. That she is trying to get you to acknowledge that the foundation of the great Jedi and Sith of old are drawn from the same well, the blood of their enemies. If the failing of the Jedi is their refusal to understand what their continued existence means, in what way did the Sith fail so utterly as to gain Kreia's ire? To learn that, we must look at one of her former students, Darth Sion. We know little of Sion, but what we know is enough to understand his purpose. Ever the relentless pursuer, he is the first Sith to feel the presence of the exile, and he is drawn to her for reasons even he cannot fully comprehend. It is said that he died long ago, and the Force is the only thing continuing to animate his broken body. Every encounter the exile has with him ends the same way, with him getting up defeat after defeat. After having given himself to the Force completely, one would have to snuff out all life everywhere to have a chance of killing he who is the offshoot of that life force. While Sion is the greatest strength of the Sith, being absolutely immortal, timeless, and relentless, he equally embodies their greatest weakness. For while he is so animated by the Force, he must but heed its voice. He has no will, no purpose, except to follow the pen of the writers, to be a mindless source of endless conflict. In short, he lives for no reason but to be a literary tool. Something needs to motivate the exile to leave the tutorial area, so Sion appears. Something needs to motivate the exile to leave Korriban, so Sion appears. And finally, someone needs to be the boss of the last area, so Sion appears. It is important that we learn nothing of him, that ultimately Sion is faceless, voiceless. Because he is denied motivation or identity, he works as a critique of the Force's use as a storytelling device. It guides those who feel it to adversarialism, but denies them true purpose of their own. Anyone who lived forever with the Force would become Sion. Jedi or Sith, they would be drawn to conflict again and again until they were nothing but the Force, controlled by its whims, utterly without any real sense of self. There is very little difference between the failings of the Jedi and the failings of the Sith. But Star Wars isn't all Knights of the Old Republic 2 seeks to critique. In and around the time that KOTOR 2 came out, there were a tremendous flap of games that sought to measure the morality of its protagonists. If I were to ask what the purpose of those systems were, there would likely be myriad answers, as outside their direct mechanical interpretations, their function was unclear at best. But at least some of you might have answered that it was to measure the good or evil your characters did within their digital environments. KOTOR 2 brings into focus those previously opaque blue and red bars. The segment with Kreia on Nar Shaddaa highlights the core aspects of this critique.
Even an act of kindness may have more severe repercussions than you know or can see. By giving him something he has not earned, perhaps all you have helped him become is a target. Seeing another elevated often brings the eyes of others who suffer. And perhaps in the end, all you have wrought is more pain. And that is my lesson to you. Be careful of charity and kindness, lest you do more harm with open hands than with a clenched fist. Very well, but mind what I have said. Use your power, but in its proper place.
This particular segment seeks to destroy the notion that these morality systems might have been based on any kind of consequentialism, and demonstrates that handily by pointing out the myopia of morality systems. The decisions are all too often forgotten, and certainly not measured after the subject of the decision leaves the view of the protagonist. KOTOR 2 proposes it is not the consequences of your actions that these meters measure, but how you feel about them. This is further shown as if you deny the lesson that Kreia sought to teach you, and insist you did a good deed, you'll get even more light side points. The priority is providing a carrot to the player in an attempt to increase their engagement with the game's wider systems and make them feel good for doing good deeds, or dastardly and villainous for doing vile acts, regardless of how those acts influence the world. More than all that, they rob the player of the need to think about what their actions mean. In games from Infamous to Mass Effect, most players will have to admit of being guilty of just accepting the red or blue answer and putting very little thought into them as a result of the game's providing those helpful colors to tell them if their choices were good or evil. Both of the choices end up being the same, insomuch as they only exist to make the player feel good for whatever playstyle and character they adopt, and absolve them of the consequences of their choices. All of these unintended consequences from these antiquated morality systems made sure that the player's choices would be forgotten by them every bit as fast as the game would. Darth Nihilus. He is featured heavily in the imagery surrounding the game. He is featured in the box art and is still the literal face of the game when you go to click on the icon and play it. And yet not only does it take him quite some time to appear in the game, and even when he does, he is barely featured in the video game that so bears his likeness. The truth, of course, is that he is not nearly as absentee as he first appears. What we learn about this silent Sith Lord is entirely through his thrall, Visis Mar. This would-be assassin is only too happy to join up with the exile after the attempt on her life fails, for Visis sees the death of her master in the exile. But who is this Nihilus, and why might the exile be his doom? The answer is in the history of Visis. She is a member of a race called the Miraluka, who choose to see solely through the Force, to only see people in the way they are connected to each other. The one thing they could not see, however, was their doom, as decayed by one who devours those connections and bonds. When Nihilus devoured the life force of every living Miraluka on the planet they dwelt upon, they were powerless to stop him. And in the end, only Visis survived. The whys are neither apparent nor important. When Nihilus found her alive, he burdened her with a most terrible curse. Nihilus forced her to see the world as he did. No connections, no meaning, only matter and fuel. To him there is not a single thing which exists to serve any purpose but to add to his strength. Another way to describe what he saw is to say he saw the world in only HP bars and XP rewards. How appropriate, then, that the only one upon which he cannot feed, that his greatest weakness is his mirror. Another with an unyielding, aching hunger for more. Us. And can we really be blamed in all this? After all, who has not yearned for one more level so dearly that casual conversations have sparked up in pen and paper games about the XP quantity you would get for just killing off that local village? However satisfying it is to see numbers attached to our characters go up, Nihilus is a critique core to KOTOR 2, as he begs us to answer the questions of why do we play RPGs? What is the purpose of stories within these systems? And can they be about something more than crass self-satisfaction? Because there is a Darth Nihilus inside all of us as we play these games, begging to see those systems as nothing more than abstractions, NPCs as nothing more than wandering bags of loot. All of this is amplified by the fact that these stories are collaborative, a back and forth. And if our fourth is that we only want more murder, then all we will get back is the hollowness of watching our numbers increase, endlessly devoid of meaning, devoid of purpose. A nihilistic cycle where we all lose. Let us turn our eyes now to our various companions and how they deepen and expand upon the game's themes. Atton is your first companion, and on the surface the most archetypal. Every bit the scoundrel and lecherous cutthroat you have come to expect from Star Wars fare. He may snark and chide, chiming in as ever the jester.
Well, looks like staying on the ship was a bad idea after all. That's what I love about Nar Shaddaa.
But this is only to keep people at bay. Even his mind is carefully pruned of excess. The only thing allowed is that which may distract or deter curious Jedi from probing deeper into his thoughts.
I taught myself techniques. It's hard for Jedi to sense what you're really thinking if you throw up walls of strong emotions and feelings. Lust, impatience, cowardice.
One of the things most telling of Atton is his reaction to the player deciding to commit random acts of violence.
What? What just happened? 1 minute we're just talking and then I just lost control. It's like this impulse just came over me. I couldn't stop myself. Next time, warn me. If you're out to kill someone, don't surprise me like that.
Atton loses himself, becomes merely an instrument of you, an extension of your arm. He is powerless to stop himself from being swept up by the fate you saddle him with, as he was powerless to stop himself from being caught in the winds of Revan wherever they took him. When finally given a chance to talk with Atton privately, he will reveal that he fought with the Jedi when they went to defend the galaxy from the Mandalorians, and fought again by Revan's side when he brought conflict to the Republic. Why? Well,
The Jedi, the Sith, you don't get it, do you? To the galaxy, they're the same thing. Just men and women with too much power, squabbling over religion while the rest of us burn. At least the Sith are honest about what they're killing for. The Jedi are pacifists, except in times of war. They're teachers, except when it comes to telling their students the truth. And when they save you, it's only so you can suffer more.
the Jedi, the Sith. All Atton knew is that as long as there was one or the other, there would be conflict. The Jedi will inevitably bring conflict by giving their enemies something to strike against, a trial to prove themselves with, and the Sith will follow the Force's call to fight and grow. No matter what, they will both stoke the fires of war. Atton himself was only a cog in this, not part of the religious squabble of the Jedi, but caught up in it all the same, no different from anyone. Atton's purpose is to bring into sharp focus the cost of the high-minded philosophical war the Jedi wage upon the populace at large, and that cost for Atton was dire indeed. A female Jedi, whose name we will never know, saw in Atton his sensitivity to the Force, and sought to save him from his fate within the ranks of the Sith. It was only a matter of time before he would be noticed, and the small window through which he saw that power of destiny would become a gaping wound, cut open by Revan and his ilk. Unfortunately for the nameless Jedi, Atton had become very good at killing Force users.
I started killing Jedi, a lot of them. People say killing Jedi is hard. It's not. You just have to be smart about it. No blasters, no getting close to them, no attacking them directly when you can gun down their allies instead. There's ways of gassing them, drugging them, making them lose control, torturing them. I was really good at it. What's worse is that killing them wasn't the best thing. Making them fall. Making them see our side of it. That was the best.
The only place the secret of Atton's force sensitivity would be safe now was the grave. And so only too willingly this woman who whispered to Atton the secrets of the universe gave her life for him. Atton, at least, did not waste her sacrifice. Tired of war and its terrible wages, he left. Lost and defeated, Atton wandered until came one in whom lived the death of the Force, a chance to end the cycles of conflict brought about by Jedi and Sith. In this time of great decline for the Jedi, most of the remaining Jedi Masters are nothing more than MacGuffins, princes in need of their heroic savior. Atris, however, is different. Atris is the chronicler of the Jedi history, and while each of the Jedi Masters shows some amount of humility in the face of the broken galaxy they have wrought, Atris starkly holds that they did not err, not even a little bit. No matter how many times the exile insisted and explained why she left to fight, Atris refused to hear the words. Atris keeps the Jedi's code, and as such is their chief adherent. If one expresses passions, it is because they have fallen to the dark side. Those who heed the call to violence and war unbidden by the Jedi, they too have fallen to be nothing more than pawns of shadow. On the other hand, however, no harm, no ill can really be committed in our eyes as long as one adheres to the code. All those millions who died while the Jedi refused to fight, only an unfortunate consequence of the most necessary facts of the Jedi teachings. The exile herself, who sought only to fight for what she believed in, cast out, ignore, and with good reason. Enter into this the person who, just as Visis expanded upon Nihilus, they expand upon Atris philosophy, the Handmaiden. There is a small issue I need to mention at this point, and it is that I have been consistently referring to the exile as female, as this was her canonical gender when KOTOR 2 was considered vaguely canonical. But KOTOR 2 is a game that allows the player to choose which gender the protagonist is. This is of note because the Handmaiden joins only the male exile's party. The Handmaiden's tale is a story of exiles and betrayals. It all began with her mother, a Jedi Master named Errant Kay, who fell into a passionate affair with an Achani senator. Damned be her Jedi teaching, and damned be his vows as husband. When the Jedi inevitably found out about the daughter who was the fruits of this affair, Kay was exiled, and when Revan called for Jedi to defend against the Mandalorians, there was no code to keep her from the defense of the innocent, and so Kay compounded her betrayal of the Jedi. In the end, she adhered no code save her own, but did more good than Atris with her stark loyalty ever accomplished. Unfortunately for Kay, she would not survive the Mandalorian Wars to raise her daughter, and her lover would likewise die to Revan, leaving the woman known as Handmaiden and her sisters to be raised by Atris. One could easily wonder why, when Kay seemingly embodied everything in the world Atris loathes. The answer lies in the oath she bade the handmaidens take to work in service to an illustrious Jedi Master. Atris made them vow they would never take up Jedi teachings in any form, despite knowing the handmaiden's Force sensitivity. With this vow, Atris shackled the handmaiden and ensured that the disloyalty that began with her mother could never be repeated. That is, until we found Atris in hiding. And curiosity, along with a guise of loyalty to Atris, finds the handmaiden in the party of the exile. Choose to show the handmaiden that there is still good inside you, and she will slowly begin to question the teachings of Atris, who could only see the exile's betrayal as a fall to the dark side, utterly unwilling to consider any other possibility. Show her this unerringly, and she will give up the vow she made to Atris and train as a Jedi, because she has the insight to see beyond her teacher and will open herself up to the truth. Her mother and father did not betray because they were weak. Quite the contrary. They betrayed their vows to be true to themselves and the spirit of the vows they had taken. Conviction drove them to accept the consequences of their decisions and carry them out to the end no matter the obstacles that betrayal may set before them. The same conviction now drives the exile, and it is no wonder that the handmaiden would pledge her life to him and fight against the bonds of fate she was saddled with, giving him the greatest bond she can imagine, her name, Brianna. Unsurprisingly, Atris sees only corruption and darkness in the actions of Brianna, and it is the exile's final confrontation that Atris reveals the form of her vile loyalty.
Sith are the Jedi are the Sith. What matters is that they be preserved. All the law, all the teachings. I am the last of the Jedi, and I will show them this truth. Bring it to the galaxy.
There can be no evil as long as there is fidelity. Such a mindset could rationalize any ill act, and so Atris went on to ruin one life after another, all in service of her myopic philosophy. Can you really say that you disagreed with her? I mean, the game gives you more stats and a cool effect on your character viewer if you only choose light or dark-sided choices. Seems worth it, doesn't it? Beodor's story echoes Atten in many ways, as he too was a mere citizen of the Republic, caught up in the struggles of the galaxy after the Mandalorians slaughtered his fellow Iridonians. Beodor was an engineer, and while he fought in the Mandalorian Wars, he was not a warrior. While he brought death just as surely as any Mandalorian, he was utterly unprepared for the weight of their souls as they bore down upon him.
It had to be done. My hands destroyed the Mandalorians. I cannot be forgiven for that. Even if I did it out of hatred of the Mandalorians. That might be the truth, but I don't want to see it that way. I can't just ignore the blood on my hands.
Despite this, it is Beodor that committed the greatest atrocity of the war, and its decisive blow at Malachor V. In a battle that the Republic and the Jedi could not win against overwhelming Mandalorian forces, he was able to deploy a superweapon, the Mass Shadow Generator, killing friend and foe alike and ending the war in a shower of blood. Where Atten abandoned his humanity in the face of the charismatic Revan, Beodor never quite could. And so when Revan called for war unending to act as a whetstone sharpening the galaxy, Beodor left, giving up all the power he had accumulated in a desperate bid to heal himself and the galaxy he so wounded. When trained by Kreia, it comes to the player's attention that their avatar is able to see into the mind of Beodor, but our mentor, Kreia, is not. It would be easy enough to pin the reason for this upon the exile's connection with Beodor during the war, but I believe it runs deeper than that. It is rather that they share one vital thing in common, that they both stood at the precipice of unimaginable power and turned away from it. They saw the result of an endless pursuit of power, and that the only ends of discharging that vital energy was suffering on a scale inconceivable to the human mind. Beodor is the polar opposite of Kreia, where she believes the only good in the world is the building of power, experience, and vital energies that they might be hurled at foes who equaled that power. He saw exactly that happen, and felt only disgust, loss, and grief that he should have so wounded the world. Another perspective, and another reason why the Star Wars must end. HK-50 is one of the first antagonists you encounter, and while he may be only a painfully obvious answer to the whodunit of the Paraga Station, at the time he was a wonderful teaser for the fate of the most remembered and memed character from the original Knights, HK-47. It isn't long until it becomes clear that these HK-50s aren't a one-off production like the original, but a whole line of units produced without end for the purpose of, well,
to facilitate communications and terminate hostilities.
Time and again they'll pursue you like hounds without a master. What is their purpose? Even they do not know. The only thing they are driven to do is emulate their predecessor in the most mimetic of ways without knowing why. They kill because HK-47 killed, and since killing is what he must have been about, they carry his role to its logical extreme, killing, slaughtering, leaving a trail of blood in the cosmos that would make even the most vile assassin blush. And yet it cannot be denied that there is a hollowness to their actions, a purposelessness. What then was HK-47's point? What did he exist to do? Ask him of love, and you will get his answer.
Answer. Many organic meatbags find that question difficult to answer, Master, but I believe I can provide you with a satisfactory definition. Definition. Love is making a shot to the knees of a target 120 kilometers away using an Aerotech sniper rifle with a tri-light scope. Statement. This definition, I am told, is subject to interpretation. Obviously, love is a matter of odds. Not many meatbags could make such a shot, and strangely enough, not many meatbags would derive love from it. Yet for me, love is knowing your target, putting them in your targeting reticle, and together achieving a singular purpose against statistically long odds.
Gruesome as it is, HK-47 lived for something. He believed in the perfection of his craft. To mass-produce his works without any understanding of their purpose, to kill without thinking would be an anathema to him, and so he makes comically the point that much of the rest of the game seems to make seriously. That the cruelest thing you can do to a person, an idea, or a work of art is to strip purpose from that thing. To reduce anything to its base components, to only those elements that lodge themselves in the public's consciousness, devoid of the context they originally existed in, is a fate worse than death. And yet, that was, in many respects, the very real legacy of HK-47, and in a way all too prescient of Star Wars itself. Both of them were reduced, HK to a snarky comic robot sidekick, and Star Wars to a story of a hero with a shining blade of light, and reproduced time and again by people who did not know or care about what these things were originally. No purpose was given to them outside what could be broadly perceived. All they saw was the opportunity to take the mimetic aspects of what they were and mass-produce them, to dismal result. To truly believe in an idea, one must be prepared to betray it. Kreia, Darth Treya, she calls herself the Great Betrayer, says that there must always be a Darth Treya. I suppose it's time that I've spoke of the player character. I have mentioned them often, made much of them. But why? What is your purpose in all this? Let us examine the exile's history briefly, and see what has brought us to our controlling them. That which gives the exile her title came about at Malachor V, when she gave the order to Beodor, commanding that her many friends and fellow officers be slain right along with her enemies. After this act, she, just like Beodor, could bear war no more. And when nearly every Jedi she fought with followed Revan to further combat, she alone returned to the Jedi Council for judgment. That judgment was exile, of course, but their reasons were obtuse, strange. It was after her judgment that the exile realized she could no longer feel the Force, that her connection to it had been severed. She blamed the Jedi Council for it, so with little recourse she traveled the galaxy until a new master chanced upon her. Seeking answers for the reason she was outcast and the Force lost to her, much of the game's runtime is spent with the player finding and either reuniting or killing much of the few remaining Jedi Masters that made her an exile. For while they will answer some questions when found, they have sworn to reveal none of their secrets until they have once again reconvened as a council. And so it is that council and Kreia that finally provide answers. The first answer is that the Jedi took nothing from the exile. They blame the events of Malachor 5 for your loss, but that is reductive at best and a grave misunderstanding at worst. The truth is something the Jedi do not want to confront, that it was their teaching that cost the exile so dearly. During the Mandalorian Wars, the exile made connections with others, bonds that opened her to their worlds. The Jedi eschew and condemn such deep bonds, prescribe a life abstaining from passions and relationships. This is meant to strengthen its followers for when conflict comes upon them. But time and again the history of the Jedi has shown that when the galaxy lights ablaze, they go up with it like so much tinder. That is the best case. More often than not, the Jedi are the source of conflict, as former students leave to become tyrannical threats. The truth is that life in the ivory towers, isolated from the world, leaves its students utterly and completely helpless to the whims of the wider societies they must inevitably interact with. It is exactly that the exile fell to. Her bonds, so powerful with comrades we will never know, when she was made to sever them, her keen awareness of the suffering that her Jedi training taught her to isolate herself from, deafened her to the Force. Yet, for as terrible as this must have been, it was this loss that gave the exile freedom from weakness the Jedi had saddled her with. She was no longer bound by their code and no longer forced to live a hollow life following the whims of fate. Even as the exile clawed her way out of the abyss and made new connections, she would inspire the Sith to do the same. In Malachor, she learned how to grow and feed off the deaths of others, and it is what you as player have been doing the whole time up until now. Again, it comes back to this. The terrible cost of human lives that must be paid for our protagonist to rise. Once again, KOTOR asks us why, in our wildest fantasies, we cannot imagine a hero without conflict. Why we see it as rote, the only path to power be littered with corpses. In another world, where the exile did not give these Jedi Masters an opportunity to talk, but slew them along with so many others, Kreia herself explains exactly what it was she sought to teach the exile. What it was she wanted to prove with all this. In her own way, she was exiled after her student, Revan, betrayed the galaxy and brought it to a brink of ruin. She needed to show, to prove to someone, anyone, that the Jedi teachings are at best incomplete. That when they cut themselves off from others, deny themselves conflict, they gain no strength, no mettle, but only coddle themselves, ensuring their own downfall time and again. In this way they give rise to the Sith, and in the end are no different from them in how much death and ruin they bring to the galaxy. The only difference being it is not through malice, but incompetence. One step further, and we can see that our endless hunger has made the Jedi what they are. We have created an entire structure of story where we see heroes rise, fall, rise again, and finally ride off into the sunset, only for further conflict to ensue. It all happens again and again. We have made them broken and impotent, that we might feel the triumph we once did at cheering on our hero's journey just one more time. If one is unwilling to criticize an idea, to grow beyond it, to betray it, the only thing you could possibly breed is endless homogeneity, endless loops without purpose. When Kreia betrays the exile, then, it is with purpose both grave and worthwhile. When she returns to Malachor, to the birthplace of the wound that could end the Force, it is in a desperate bid not to destroy the galaxy, but to give it new breath and cause without the eternal conflict brought about by heroes' rise and fall. Alas, however, we know she is destined to fail in more ways than one. It was a long road for Knights 2 getting where it is today. but it stands as a monument to some of the greatest strengths of Obsidian's writers. It shows a great passion and understanding for the subjects of the game's critique, and the world of both gaming and Star Wars would likely have been much better off if they had listened to its warnings and admonishments. Instead, gaming feeds the vapid, craven desire for unearned power, fueling our basest and most self-destructive impulses, while Star Wars would go on to be exactly the kind of aimless and impotent tool of unconsidered destiny Darth Sion was such a portent of. If only those future creatives and writers had stopped and listened. If only they had learned, if you love an idea, it is your duty to betray it. Thank you for listening.